black storm coming. See the lightning strike. Black people rising.
Diop went to this conference on the peopling of ancient Egypt. Now I want you to listen to this very carefully. After many years, more than 2 centuries in which European universities and academics have stated that Egypt is Caucasoid, or it is Semitic or Hamitic or Afro-Semitic or Afro-Hamitic, eventually they invited Sheikh Anta Diop and Theophile Obenga. This is the first time at any international conference on an intellectual matter that Africans are invited up to deal with their own story. Theophile Obenga, he wrote me last week. This is the first time I'm hearing from him, because apparently Diop left a lot of papers after he died, and so several people in France and French-speaking Africa suddenly become aware of the journal for the first time. Theophile Obenga is an expert on Bantu. He's head of the Bantu Research Institute in Brazzaville. He's a great linguist, like Diop. And they appeared at this conference. Everybody else was European or Arab, from the Arab Republic of Egypt. And at this conference, everybody came unprepared except the 2 Africans. Could you imagine that? This is a conference meeting, an academic conference meeting to discuss the peopling of Egypt, and these guys arrived empty-handed, talking from their heads. The Africans arrived with heavily researched papers. The linguistic evidence of Diop was so startling that everyone had to admit this is one of the revolutionary things, that Diop and Obenga, particularly Diop, had proven beyond the shadow of a doubt that the Egyptian language was not Semitic or Hamitic, it was African. But there is where the agreement ended, because when Diop tried to show that not only the language was African, but that the people were African, everybody got upset. And those people who couldn't say that it is not so, they said, we mustn't talk about race anymore. We are all human beings here. Let's stop talking about race. So let me read you the passage from my introduction which deals with this. A summary of this conference is of interest and value to readers, since it reveals the state of Egyptology at the moment and the defensive reaction to the question of blackness or Negroness. Professor Galab of the Arab Republic of Egypt declared that the human race during the Paleolithic era, which is the Stone Age, was more or less homogeneous and Caucasian, meaning to say all human beings were first white. This is an Egyptian, you know. And that Negroes only began to appear much later. A Negro culture, he claimed, did not appear prior to the Neolithic, that is the age of agriculture. Professor Di Bono of Malta spoke of a race of pyramid builders coming into Egypt, a race with Libyco-Asiatic affinities, without even deeming it necessary to show where on this earth stands the proto-pyramid that this race constructed before it migrated to Africa. How could you have a race of pyramid builders who never built pyramids anywhere else? Several participants, finding it difficult to demolish Diop, decided instead to demolish all talk about race. Professor Saf Soderberg of Sweden, while demonstrating that the majority of Neolithic cultures in the Nile Valley belong to the techno-complex of Saharan and Sudanic cultures, said the concept of race was outmoded and should now be abandoned. After he showed that the technology of the early Egyptians is Sudanic and Saharan, which is African, he said, don't talk about race. Race is outmoded, must be abandoned. Professor Vorkut of France, insisting that there was no way to tell how many of the Egyptians were white and how many were black, felt the evidence nevertheless showed that Egypt at least was African in its way of writing, its culture, and its way of thinking. Now just imagine that. You can't tell how many white people are there, yet everything they're doing is African. In other words, they're white Africans. these white Africans, their language, they said, is African, their culture is African, their science is African, and yet you can't tell whether they're white or black. Professor Shinny of Canada said that Herodotus and all the Greeks and Romans who had called Egyptians black were merely being subjective like Dr. Diop. Race was not a scientific concept. Professor Mokhtar of the Arab Republic of Egypt said the problem of race was unimportant. Professor Abdullah of the Sudan, after chiding Diop for adopting an Africanist approach to this problem, went on boldly to assert that the Egyptian language belonged to a family of Proto-Semitic languages and that there was abundant evidence to prove it. He had not come to the conference, however, with his abundant evidence. This, in fact, was one of the remarkable revelations of this international conference. In its final report, UNESCO pointed out, quote, listen to this, although the preparatory working paper set out by UNESCO gave particulars of what was desired, not all participants had prepared communications comparable with the painstakingly researched contributions of Professor Sheikh Anta Diop and Ubenga. The Africans at last had done their homework, and those theses, which had once seemed formidable, now shook with the fragility of leaves and the new intellectual wind blowing from the continent.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Umoja Circle. My name is Keith Smokey Johnson. For those of you who do not know much about the Umoja Circle is an African-centered talk show. And the purpose of the Umoja Circle is to correct errors where errors are found and to introduce facts where we find that so many people are working on fiction when it comes to who we are as people of African descent. And there was a short video that I introduced to you before I came on, and I hope you got some insights on it. And I want to focus on that a little bit more. I brought this up a couple of times in the past in previous shows, but I want to go into more detail. I'm going to do a two-part show on the ethnicity of the Egyptian people. As you can see, there was a conference from that video in 1974, and all of the UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural organization, which is an arm of the UN that goes around and produces these UNESCO sites and stuff. They really decided to come together and decide make a decision once and for all that the Egyptians were black people, whether they were or not. And they brought all these scholars, a little bit over 20 of them. The only two black faces that was there was the Sheikh Anta Diop and Dr. Teofile Obenga, and they blew them out the water. And I also have some visual documentation to support what those brothers brought to light. And the fact that what is disturbing, that we're still arguing about something that has been put to rest in 1974. But there's a reason for that, and I want to deal with that at first, and then I want to again go through the show to show you that what they're talking about is right, and there's no ifs and buts about it. But we need to show some facts, okay? I got some videos of this slides, and this is one again. I'm just going to go over again what you saw on the video clip. If some of y'all might have got didn't understand some of the concepts. This went again at the 1974 UNESCO conference on Egyptology was dealt a fatal blow. Okay. 2 African scholars wiped the floor with 18 world-renowned Egyptologists. But there were also anthropologists, iconographers, and all these people who were at the top of their field at that time. And these 2 African, Dr. Diop and Dr. Obenga, proved in 11 different categories with evidence that the ancient Egyptians were black people. The question of the race were the ancient Egyptian, what race was the ancient Egyptian, was resolved at this historical international Cairo symposium, which is called. And you can look everything I'm saying up, which is held between the time of January 28th to February 3rd of 1974. The United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, UNESCO, convened 20 again of the top Egyptologists. Let me just go on to the next slide. Okay, evidence from numerous academic disciplines, like they said, 11. That's what Dr. Diop and Dr. Obenga brought to the other one. The rest of them were not even prepared for this. Presented specific information to prove that the black origin of the Kemet. It is obvious from the conference report that Diop dominated the proceedings and confronted with this solid argument. Most of the participants changed their position during the conference. It is clear that the participants abandoned the old Caucasoid and Western Asiatic theories that they all tried to bring the Egyptians into the European white-facing type of theory, not based on anything scientific, but just an idea that people who look like me and many of you out there could not have created such a great civilization, one of the oldest or the oldest high civilizations in human history. And that concept could not penetrate. Again, there's a reason, okay? And at the bottom, salute to Sheikh Anta Diop and Theophilo Obenga. They should be on your, coming out your mouth every time we have discussions about Egypt. They've proven this. Let's go on. Okay, these are the two brothers that you need. On the left is Sheikh Anta Diop from Senegal, and there's on the right Dr. Theophile Obenga. Sadly, Dr. Diop has passed, but Dr. Obenga is still with us. Very old, but he's still with us. A brilliant linguist. Let's go on to the next one. One of the most significant revelations presented at the Cairo Symposium was Diop's development, again, 11 different disciplines, but this was the one that blew him out the water, called the melanin dosage test. This one simple test provided the means by which one could determine the phenotype, okay, of the Egyptian royal mummies by examining the melanin content present in their skin. Okay, if they got a lot of melanin, they look like me. If they don't, they look like somebody from Norway. If they didn't have that melanin. I'll go on to the next one. Okay, the test involved the acquisition of specimens consisted of a few square millimeters of mummified skin, which was then coated with ethyl benzoate and exposed to natural or ultraviolet light. This procedure rendered the melanin granules in the skin specimen fluorescent, thus enabling them to be able to be counted by Diop, who stated that that this experiment was very important, and it was a groundbreaking experiment. But how many of you have heard this? Let's go on to the next one. Now, if you want to, again, I will bring sources to my discussions on this show. Here, in Volume 2 is where you're going to find the debate at the Cairo Symposium. Okay, they released a 8-volume of research, and Volume 2 where you'll find the melanin dosage and the fact that Dr. Benga and Dr. Diop blew away the other scholars who came unprepared for the truth, because they were living on the false precepts of white supremacy. Okay, let's get that straight. And anything that came into academia stating black history or black being a part of history was ignored. And there's a reason for this bias that's going on. This is 1974, but this is not the only idea of biases. Let's go on to this. Okay, as you can see, here's what I mean by implicit bias. Implicit bias is a form of bias that occurs automatically, without even thinking, just blow it off, and unintentionally, that nevertheless affects judgments, decisions, and behaviors. Let's go on to the next. That's what it is. And this bias did not come out of the blue. This was part of academia, and the source of this bias of white supremacy, of the white race being the best and dominant race, did not come out of any kind of real scientific study, like the Genome Project or dealing with that. They didn't have anything like that. It was just a bunch of white people who, without going on to do any research, came up with this concept. Okay, let's read this thing. This is between 1775 and 1800. There's a German university called Göttingen established the concept of the science of antiquity, okay, upon which future universities will build. The slanted and distorted research which emerged from this institution established much of the intellectual framework within which later research and publications within the new professional disciplines was carried out. This stated by Martin Bernal. He's a professor at Cornell University, or was. He died not too long ago. The myths that were created at Göttingen have been held sway in academia for more than 200 years, from 1775. Okay? Very few scholars took seriously any theory that conflicted with this concept of belief that the ancient Egyptians could have been anything other than Caucasian. So they would not even, that's that bias I introduced you to, okay? By the early 1970s, these biases were scholarly, intellectually, and scientifically challenged by those two Africans that I talked about at the symposium. But I want to stay here for a few seconds. The person who established that wrote a book in 1775. His name was Johann Friedrich Blumenbach. Okay, this is a German professor, and Göttingen is just a university town, okay? Just like you have Yale or Harvard, but at that time it was Göttingen, which was the world-renowned town who established that science of antiquities. And the people who were drawn to this stuff was people who came from the humanities, no anthropological training, no Egyptology training. They just came from these antiquities, but they had this bias because what was going on in the 1700s and 1600s with people like me? Okay, how could you had to establish an established order of logic that said that, these people didn't have any history, did not do anything. This was a justification they were savages. Same thing they said about the Native Americans. But they said that about black people. And when you had any kind of alternate scientific theory that said that no, they were, when people went to Egypt and they saw that these statues and these people looked like the people that we have been enslaving for the previous 200 years, since 1775, going back to the 1400s, 1500s, and the 1600s. But that bias cannot, that's why Dr. Diop and Dr. Obenga ran up against this resistance because of this. Another thing that Blumenbach created, he was the first one in his book in 1775, third volume, came up with the word Caucasian, okay? And he thought race, this white supremacist thinking, because the word caucus came from the Caucasoid Mountain. So he thought in Georgia, in Georgia today, and he saw that the people who were there at the base of the Caucasoid Mountain were the most beautiful people that he ever saw. This was his scientific thesis based on, where he came up with Caucasian, that separates them from the brown, black, and other groups, lesser people. No scientific other than this man's opinion, but it affected the way people thought for hundreds of years, and still to this day. You have people who think that people who look like me had no history other than what was given to them by Europe. Let's go on. Okay, this is a fancy word, another German word that came out of Germany called Zeitgeist. It just means the thinking of an age. All right, and let's go on to the dictionary. The defining spirit or mood of a particular period of history as shown by the ideas, the beliefs of that time. Göttingen was the university that had this Blumenbach who wrote these books that other universities or budding universities would use for their foundational work in what will become anthropology, Egyptology, social sciences in the future. Came from this pseudo assumption of black inferiority and white superiority. And that age still exists today, okay? The zeitgeist, how people think during a particular time, a particular period. Since 1400s, when they kidnapped the Africans, and then it became the dark continent, and then they became savages, and you enslaved these people. You did not give them any, you took them, sold their children, did all these things. You couldn't face that reality. So you had to use them to look as animals, so they didn't have a history. And you think that it's something that's just something done in Germany? But we have, every time I went to school, I learned about the next couple of people that had an opinion on black folks. Let's go on. Arthur Thornby, a world-renowned historian, said, when we classify mankind by color, the only one of the primary race which has not made a creative contribution to any of our 21 civilizations is the black race. This is Arnold Thornby. If you've heard of him, if you went to any college class or even high school, this is what's been taught to black children for hundreds of years. And they're still trying to manipulate the schools today. Don't want to teach us black history in Florida and things like that. The zeitgeist still exists. Let's go on. The next one, Thomas Jefferson, right? Third president of the United States. I advance it, therefore, as a supposition only that the blacks, whether originally a distant race or made distinct by time and circumstances, are inferior to the whites in the endowment of both body and mind. Okay? This is in America. Thomas Jefferson, who has a monument in Washington, D.C., this is how we think. And he wasn't the only one. This was the zeitgeist of America, the zeitgeist of Europe, and it's embedded in the social structure and the thinking to this very day. And we got to challenge that with the truth. This is what I do at the Umoja Circle. This is David Hume, a philosopher, famous. You've heard of him. I am apt to suspect the Negroes to be naturally inferior to the whites. There never was a civilized nation of any other complexion other than white, nor any individual eminent actions or speculation. No ingenious manufacturers among them, no arts or sciences, okay? That says a lot for us as blacks or our native brothers and sisters. Okay, let's go on to this next one. But I want to show you what the Egyptians called themselves. They knew who they were. This is a hieroglyph that comes right off the wall. Okay, that upper left is a burnt piece of charcoal, and it represents in the hieroglyph K and M. You have a bilateral and you have monoliterals. So that means some of those symbols have two letters meaning, and some of them have one letter meaning. That's what that means. So the KM, that stands for K. This is found on the walls of Kemet, okay, what they call themselves. Okay, that burnt charcoal, it spells KM, that owl spells M, and that upside down bowl spells T, Kemt, K-M-M-T. When we say Kemet, the E's, there was no vowels in the Egyptian language. So early Egyptologists put vowels in there so that this English language could pronounce them, okay? And that thing with the X, like a cross, that's what's called a determinative. It's sort of, I kind of like an emoji. Okay, for those that give you a little understanding, it tells you what the rest of it means. So when you see that Kemt means black or is a nation or a city, that's what it meant. So it's a black nation. That's what they call themselves. Okay, they admitted that they are a black nation. The burnt charcoal, that's what that chip is. Let's go on to the next one. Okay, and people say, well, they talk about the dark soil and the black soil. No, Kemt, the black, plus you see those two symbols on the right of that? circle, there's a man and a woman, that means people. Black people. This is what they wrote on the walls and temples and the scrolls about themselves, yet we still have that zeitgeist that there's no history for black people, that we did not do things, and they tried to make the Egyptians white or some white-facing strange people. No, they were black people from the Nile Valley, and that's what I'm going to continue on in the next show to show you. And here it is, carved in stone, because they knew we might have forgot who we are. You see the bird chip there to the left, you see the owl, you see the upside down bowl, and then you see that symbol that says this a black nation, black. We are who we are. They're letting us know who we are. A language gives you a record. A language gives you is a witness to the progress of a people. They knew that. So that's why a language is important. And you got to understand the language. Don't let somebody else tell you who you are. You got to do this research. Look at this brother. Okay? That's on the wall. Okay, let's go on to the next one. I got a few images. Look, you see from deep in Africa, you see all these Africans. They don't look like Europeans, but they match the ancient Egyptians that you see on the left. On the right, they're modern-day African. That's the Afar brother up there in the upper right. Let's go on. Look at that sister. You see sisters walk around with braids like that to this very day. Look at that. And yet we have this zeitgeist that we didn't create anything. When you see this on the walls of Kemet, and it was proven in 1974 that these were black people. Look at this. This is at the Cairo Museum, all right? Wigs. And then look at this sister. That's Queen Hatshepsut at the Cairo Museum. That's one of her statues. And look at that sister. You gonna tell me that this is not, we're not the people of Kemet? And this is Queen Tut that came out of the tomb when Carter took him out on the left. This is his grandfather, Amenhotep III, one of the pharaohs. And this is the great Queen T. You tell me that's a white woman? When you see this, look at on the left. That's a statue of Imhotep. He's the one who built the step pyramid, a multi-genius. That's his mother. Look at that sister, and look at their picture. Look at these. It's right there. They tell you who you are, who they are. They want us to remember. And look at this brother. Okay, this is a black man. You could see on the streets of Harlem, here in San Antonio, East Side, Brooklyn, New York, Los Angeles, anywhere you see black people, that's who you're seeing. So I'm gonna stop it here and let you know. These are the books. It's in books. Nile Valley, Civilization, and I'll go on further south in the next show, and let you know that even the Egyptians say they came from the south. Okay, in places called Nubia and Kush. So until next time, peace, Hotep, bye-bye.